And as I was just talking about, here we are at the end of June, beginning of July.
It's the halfway point.
Really the halfway point. I think we're playing, for some teams at least, not every team.
Only the Mets played their 81st
Are
game because
playing
they're
their
behind a
81st
little
game
bit. Other
today.
teams have more.
Right. I think certain teams like the Padres have played a zillion games. I think playing in Korea definitely sort of set them ahead of everybody else. But, I mean, this is really the halfway point of the season. So, at this point, the wild card race kind of, you can start talking about it. Interestingly, as much as we were talking about as last week was too early, kind of feels appropriate to start discussing it about the halfway point, right?
We've heard all the things about the National League and how they had very few teams over 500, and that's changed a little bit this week because a couple of teams like the Mets got to 500 at least. But what struck me about the National League races, if you will, aside from the clear division leaders, the Phillies, Brewers, and Dodgers, and they have sizable leads, all of them, at least 6.5 games. The Braves are the number one wild card team. Even they have been slumping, by the way. They're only 10 games over 500. But there are 9 teams that have between 40 and 45 losses right now.
You got a lot of teams.
9.
There's really only 2 teams in the National League that just aren't in it at all, and that's the Marlins and the Rockies.
I'd say the National. Well, you know what? The Nationals are in it. What am I saying?
Right. They're right there at 44 losses. So if you're saying that the teams at 45, like the Cubs are still in, then the Nats are in at 44. So you've got a zillion teams in the National League that are theoretically
fighting for 2 spots. If you give the Braves the first one,
right? And it's like the thing is, the Braves are. It's so interesting because the Braves are 46 and 36. And then you have the Padres, who also have 46 wins. But because they have 42 losses, it's such a different position for them. But they played 6 more games than the Braves.
Does the Braves 46 and 36 include their loss here on Sunday, so that because they lost, they got beat today by the Pirates?
I'm not sure how up to date the MLB standings.
I think it is up to date, though. I think that's what it is, and so and the Cubs. Well, I want to talk about the Cubs. I'm glad you brought them up, right? Because I personally picked the Cubs to win the National League Central. Now, the Cubs are right now a last-place team in the National League Central. Granted, only a one lane game in the loss column behind the Reds. But at what point do you look at the Cubs and you say, man, that's not a very good team?
Now? Well, I mean, at what point are you going to give up on them, I guess, is more the question you're asking.
Well, I guess with the wild card being what it is, have to start saying, are the Brewers too far ahead with 11 games, ahead or 10.5 games ahead of the Cubs right now? And let's say you're not going to win the division, or more likely you're not going to have to beat one of the other teams to get the wild card. That's a messed up looking team, though. I think what Craig Counsell thought he was getting, he did not get. So you have a Cody Bellinger who, I'm going to say this in the nicest way I can. So Cody Bellinger, it can't be your number one offensive player. And they kind of paid him like he was sort of the number 1A offensive player, but I don't think the Cubs have one.
Right. Maybe Cubs fans would say Ian Happ is that guy for them.
Oh, come on. Ian Happ as your number 1 offensive player?
Like I don't think...
No one, and then you are a bad team then.
Right, and he's certainly hitting not, like he normally would. He's down to 229 this season, and that's really... And Christopher Morel, unfortunately, the Javi Baez comps feel a little too real.
Look, Morel's got great power. We've seen as Met fans, we've seen it. He's hit, I think, 3 bombs
he's got 15 home runs this season.
He's got 15 homers, but he's kind of got the steel glove over there at third base.
He's also hitting under 200.
And he's hitting under 200. So you can't do 2 of those 3 things bad, which is what he's doing.
Right, and so...
Dansby Swanson, not having a good year.
I think it was tough to count on him to continue to play at the level that he played at last season. That was a really good year from Dansby Swanson, and I don't even expect that.
I like that player a lot, but it's certainly a down year. Seiya Suzuki, I don't know how you... I think when you brought him in last year, you expected more than what you've gotten.
Right, and it doesn't help that he's missed a bunch of games this year. But when he's played, he's hit well for them. But when you've played 79, 80 games, and he's only played in 60 of them, that really hurts. He's missed the third of the season,
and they don't have the depth, that they can afford to just put somebody else in there and have him, take up the slack. So I think the Cubs and the pitching has kind of,
Well, Justin Steele hasn't been the pitcher you'd hoped he'd be.
You hope he'll get back to that because he obviously was injured. Imanaga has been great. You can't say anything more about that.
Javier Assad has been very good for
them. Was really good. So,
But, like Kyle Hendricks, it looks like the gig is finally up for him this year.
Yeah, I think so, too. So I don't I don't see this Cub team making a run, I guess is what I'm trying to say, at least to make a run at the Brewers to win the division. So they're going to have to get hot enough and hope that some of those 9 teams we talked about crash and burn.
And that's what's going to happen. I would say by the end of July, that will have shaken down to probably 6 teams, just because there's going to be some teams that go running out ahead, and you're just going to have teams, they kept playing at about a 500 pace, but now they're 5 games under 500, and all the wild card teams are 5 games over 500. And it's like, okay, yeah, you're probably not making up 10 games in the loss column in the last 2 months of the season, most likely.
And the Padres, who had been swept by the Mets a week and a half or so ago, then went on a winning streak and now are solidly in second place in the West. They lost here on Sunday, so they I think I had said before, I think they have the pieces in place to be able to stay in the race all the way to the end.
They've got the inside track now. They've played themselves into having that, and what's best for them is it's not like the Braves have played so amazingly well that you
can't catch them.
You can't catch them, right? You're not worried about them. Like, okay, yeah, we really are playing for 2 spots. For you kind of are playing for 3 slots, so you're feeling pretty good about that.
Yeah. And in that division, I just took note of a game that happened Saturday night between the Dodgers and Giants, and don't they always have this? So tie game. It was in the 9th inning, and they both score a run in the 10th inning. All right, and which happens a lot in an extra inning game with the extra runner. And then the Dodgers go, okay, if you're going to just keep being pesky like that by matching our run, we'll score 7 in the 11th inning.
Right. Okay.
In a 14-7
we'll just end
win.
This.
Yeah, we're going to put a touchdown on the board in the 11th inning, and that's what they did. And they put away the Giants. And the Dodgers, once they get on kind of like a hitting jag in a game, it's like contagious. It's like a virus.
Yeah, like they're just like, oh, we're going to crush the ball now.
So and the Giants, that's a team that I've been doubtful of. I still am doubtful of in terms of them. But watching Doval pitch, that guy, he struck out Ohtani and was filthy.
they have some unbelievable pitchers on that team. It's just for years and what we've always been afraid that offense has been anemic, and there's no reason to think it's going to change anytime soon.
And weren't we just saying that the Rockies in our last week's podcast, had a nice little run? They had one set. Yeah, they're 2-8 in their last 10.
Right, exactly.
They're still the Rockies.
Right, they're still the Rockies. Those are really the only 2 teams that you could fully count out in the National League. Whereas you look at the American League, and it feels like there's a lot more teams that don't have a chance in the American League. Like, you have the White Sox and the Athletics, but I also think like teams like the Angels, I think you have to be real worried if you're a team like the Rangers.
Well, I think so. Let's just go backwards for a second, because the Angels actually had a really good week.
But that was them playing themselves out of becoming an Oakland Athletics tier bad team.
But as they go into Sunday night, they have the same amount of losses as the Rangers. And I was going to say, I officially proclaim that the Rangers are in trouble.
Well, I mean, I think it's 37-46, yeah, they would probably agree with you.
Well, and they're in trouble not because Max Scherzer came back and actually looked pretty good in his pitch. Jordan Montgomery hasn't.
No,
so he's been not very good at all. Corey Seager got hit in the hand.
Montgomery's in Arizona.
I'm sorry, you're right. He's in Arizona. I'm thinking of him from last year in the World Series.
Right.
My mistake. And Uvalde hasn't had this. That's the guy.
Right.
Hasn't had the year.
And John Gray's been good, but he struggled recently against the Mets. I know that he's been probably their best pitcher year to date.
Yeah, and so they're still waiting for Jacob DeGrom to come back. And let's just take a second here.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just take a second.
I mean, that's a lot to expect DeGrom to come back and be anything at this point.
So the Mets decided to not pay Jacob DeGrom what was $170
a lot of money
million for
an obscene amount of money.
Obscene amount of money, and they said, no, you go. And boy, does that look like a good decision.
Oh, I mean, he immediately got hurt.
Wow. I mean, has he pitched 10 games for Texas since he's been there? Maybe 10 games. They were all at the beginning of last season. So
then he went on the IL and hasn't been back since.
Working his way back into it, but
right. And it's just so much to expect him to come back and contribute. And even if he's good, does it really matter if you're 10 games out of the race at the point where he comes back?
The best thing about them is they play in the AL West in a way, which nobody has run away. The Mariners have had a bad week, going 3-7, and so they kind of come back to the pack a little bit. And so the Rangers, without Corey Seager, have no chance.
Right, so Corey Seager took a ball off the hand this week.
He might be okay.
He might be fine. We don't know where he is.
Everybody's getting hit in the hand, by the way. So Guerrero get hit in the hand, and Judge got hit in the hand, and Soto got hit in the hand.
Easily the most concerning place a batter can take a hit by pitch. Because it's probably one of the few places that you can really sustain a major injury.
But, the Angels, have sort of made themselves, like you said, back into, Oakland area, and they're going to get Mike Trout back, it looks like, in early to mid-July. I don't even know if you're the Angels. Is that going to be yes? That's going to be the difference.
It'll make it more exciting.
Yeah, well, he's certainly a guy you want to watch.
But the problem you're going to see just for these other teams, you've got teams like the Guardians and the Orioles. Sorry, the Guardians and the Orioles, who have basically run away with their division.
Well, I would say that.
But not so much the Orioles, but the Guardians kind of are starting to trend into that.
Yeah, I believe now in the Guardians in a way that I did not.
But they're not going to miss the playoffs.
No, right, that's what I'm saying. They have the components. They have what it takes. Right, even losing Shane Bieber in the first 2 weeks of the season, which you thought
they're not going to blink.
I thought that was devastating to them. But their bullpen is the best in baseball.
But what I'm saying is that for teams like the Tigers, you're playing for a wild card spot already in that division.
Tigers are done.
Right.
Tigers are done.
It's just interesting that the Tigers at 37-46, you're proclaiming them as done, while a team that has a similar record in the National League is still in the race.
Well, because it's a better team.
Right.
Mainly. Yeah,
what are the teams? Do you think the Rangers are? Do you think the Rangers are done?
I think the Rangers are in trouble. Right?
What about the Blue Jays?
The Blue Jays are done.
Mm-hmm.
They're done. There's just something wrong. We've said this a bunch of times on this podcast. The mix is bad. They need to change it. Manager, GM, organizationally, the whole thing's just a mess.
Mm-hmm.
And in a division where you have three good teams, and the Rays have played a lot better lately. All of a sudden, you've got four teams at 500 or better in the American League East. No surprise. And the Red Sox just keep going on. I don't know how they're going to keep doing it, but they've done it through half a season. So.
Right, and I think you look at the first place teams, and the Guardians had a great week going 7-3, and then you had the Yankees who dropped out of first place in the American League East. Now the Baltimore Orioles taking over, as the Yankees pitching has just kind of come apart at the seams over the month of June. I think they've given up the most runs in the majors, even more than the Rockies.
And we're doing our best job of not talking too much about the Mets here because we're obviously giant Met fans, but they spanked the Yankees this week at Citi Field, mainly in terms of how they beat up on the pitchers. Right, Garrett Cole and
Luis Gil
just got raked by the Mets. And even though the Yankees made a run in one of the games, giving up 9 runs is a long way to go to try to get back.
Right, and they're up today against Toronto, so that they've righted the ship a
Cole
little bit.
Cole
pitched well today, so that was a big encouraging sign for them. But really, all the first place teams in at least the American League, with really the exception of the Mariners, so 2 out of 3, are cruising right along. I think the first place team that probably had the most concerning week is the Philadelphia Phillies, just because you're nervous about what would happen to Bryce Harper and Kyle Schwarber.
Yeah, not serious injuries, they've said, and they're only on the 10-day IL. So you kind of figure you're July 1 when this drops, so you're basically, 12 days, 13 before the All-Star break.
So you're going to hold them out probably through the All-Star break.
You might consider doing that, even although they're eligible to come back, and if they can hit and play, and then they should hit and play. But, the Phillies aren't really worried.
No, especially with the way the Braves have taken a step back, especially since the Acuna injury.
So I wouldn't put too much worry in the Phillies doing that, nor would I say the Mets are going to go on a tear like this and finish 20 games over 500 at the end of the season either.
And the Dodgers look like they're going to be just fine in the National League West. That sort of seems like that almost feels like a foregone conclusion at this point.
They've still got some pitchers coming back,
and they got pitchers. They have ammunition coming back and reinforcements. And I think the Brewers are sort of in a state where I'm like, okay, they need to mess this up now.
Yeah,
it's hard for me to think that one of these other teams in the National League Central is suddenly just going to go on a crazy tear and catch them. So if that's the case, then it's more on the Brewers suddenly have to have a sustained stretch of bad play where they go in 3-15 over a period of a couple weeks or something. That's how they end up all of a sudden back in the realm of the Cardinals and the other teams.
And
that would make the NL Central really exciting.
I overvalued, and I'm not the only one, I don't think, the moving Craig Counsell to Chicago from Milwaukee as if that was going to have some sort of bad effect on the team. And Pat Murphy, who came in, first-time manager.
Well, I think it's even worse because it hasn't had a bad effect on the Brewers, and it hasn't done much for the Cubs.
So at this point, the Brewers just are, and they're a much better hitting team than a lot of people, including me, thought.
Right, that's the shocking thing is that they've scored as well as they have. I mean, they're not an elite offense, but they've been much better than I think people expected.
Right. And, we would do a disservice if we didn't mention another passing of a Hall of Fame ball player this past week, former Giant and Cardinal, as much as he was a Giant. He won an MVP with St. Louis, but he came up with the San Francisco Giants and was a teammate of Willie Mays. I think Orlando Cepeda won the Rookie of the Year, and is obviously, I said, a Hall of Famer, 379 home runs, 279 career batting average. The Baby Bull was, a terrific player on a team with some really good ball players. So you had McCovey and you had Mays. So he was just another guy.
He was the third star on that
hell
team.
of another guy to have. So
3 Hall of Famers is not a lot of teams can boast that.
But one thing I wanted to mention about Cepeda that I noted is after his career was over, he got arrested and served 5 years for transporting marijuana, which there's only one reason you'd be doing that. And so he was not voted into the Hall of Fame by the baseball writers. They passed him over looking like, oh, no, you've crossed the line.
And then he got put in via committee?
Right. The Veterans Committee put him in because he really was that great a ball player. But the point I wanted to make was that I think that shows that, that's a sentiment change, because you wouldn't have thought the Veterans Committee would have accepted, if the writers booted him, wouldn't let him in because of, transporting marijuana, then the old guys that played with him let him go.
You know what? I disagree on that, because I could see the writers being a lot more obsessed with protecting the sanctity and the purity of the game.
You just said it.
In that way, where the players would be a lot more like, yeah, whatever, the guy could play. And I think that would matter a lot more to the players. They'd be like, okay, yeah, whatever. The thing that he was busted for wasn't related to the game itself. It was after his career was over. And while he was a player, yeah, he was a Hall of Famer.
And the way we look at marijuana today, obviously, is much different than we did in the 70s.
Right, that was a much bigger deal.
It was a much bigger deal. It was a gateway drug, and so...
And he got 5 years in prison.
And he got 5 years in prison for it, whereas today, basically, I don't know how teams handle it, but it's legal in about half the states.
Exactly.
And so I don't know how if a player, because they might have clauses in contracts or whatnot about...
But that's probably between the players, the individual... Because let's put it this way, I'm pretty sure... Cody Bellinger has a contract. It has it in his contract that he is allowed to hit that stuff. Have you seen that man on the bench?
I don't know what you're talking about. So I wanted to mention that a player got a home run in his first at bat. And what I was surprised about...
He's got another one already, and this is Jonski. How do you pronounce his name?
John Kensey.
John Kensey
Noel.
Noel.
J-H-O-N. I don't know why do that to him. I mean, maybe he's from like the island.
That's not our fault. I know.
The Mets had a guy named John Ashwini Fargas.
Right. Yeah. So John Kensey Noel homered in his first at bat against the Orioles this week, and he became, I think, the 136th player to homer in the first at bat of his career.
Right. We looked that up, because I was like, well, I hear guys doing that. How many times does this happen? 136 times is a lot.
Right. Happened to Brett Beatty.
Yep. And Benny Agbayani, if you're a Met fan.
Did it also happen with Kaz Matsui?
I think you might be right. Very good. Yes. So anyway, that was kind of interesting that happened last week, and as did the idea that the Yankees, when Stroman pitched the other day, you kind of saw him on the mound, and there was a ground ball to shortstop, and Volpe throws it to Torres, who throws it to first, and it's not a double play. And Stroman, because he's just this way, demonstrably on the mound is yelling, throw the ball.
He wasn't
he's mad.
Well, he wasn't the only pitcher to do that this week. Justin Steele last night got very frustrated with his defense after they made a couple miscues in the Cubs game. He was yelling at them and complaining. So it's very interesting that the pitchers are seeming a little bit more demonstrative when they're unhappy with the defensive performance behind them.
And the thing about the Stroman play was, they kind of said, okay, this was everything that the players did on the field. No, that was right. Like there was no delay. He wasn't slow to first. It wasn't a slow throw and all that stuff. Like, so why did you decide then to freak out about this? Because you're so frustrated. Because you know why the Yankees have lost a bunch of games in a row.
Exactly.
And
you know what? The team got fired up and played really well after that. They ended up winning that game when they were down, I think 6-1 at that point.
And then there's Stroman standing next to Judge in the dugout, who's talking to him, the captain. Ostensibly, we think, saying something like, "We don't do that here," You don't really know exactly what's said between and Stroman saying after game everything's fine. Me and Judge are great. I love Aaron, which is what you have to say if you're a Yankee, by the way.
I think you have to just say that if you're on any team.
Well, no, if you're with Aaron Judge,
Well, I mean, I don't think there's any two players that are come out after the game that are going to be like, yeah, no, I hate this teammate, regardless of who it is.
Right. So so I think that's that's kind of interesting that Stroman's still doing the same kind of stuff.
I mean, he's always going to be Stroman, and I mean, if you're going to talk about guys getting in trouble, you have to go to the obvious guy of the week in Edwin Diaz, who got busted last Sunday night for the sticky stuff on his hands and has been suspended 10 games. That's a week down the roster spot for that. And I think my ultimate frustration with that isn't that he was kicked out of the game. Whatever. The umpire judged his hands as not being allowed or whatever. My issue is with the 10-game suspension. The fact that the team loses 10 games and a roster spot for those 10 games because of this feels unnecessarily punitive, especially given how unscientific this procedure is. Because it's basically up to any individual umpire's judgment of, is this too sticky or not? And considering we spend half our time as fans ranting about how they can't tell where the ball is being thrown, are you really going to trust them having individual, all the correct interpretation of how sticky something is?
Yeah, we were watching, was it today or yesterday, where they lost track of the count?
That was yesterday.
That was in the ball game. So it's like, that was ball 4, wasn't it? No, and the umpire's like, it's still ball 3. And they said, we're going to have to go to the video and look and see how many balls and strikes there were.
It was only the umpires that were confused about that.
Everybody else knew what it was.
The pitcher knew, the batter knew, the fans knew, the announcers knew. It was rough.
And so I think from Diaz's standpoint, his defense was, I was using the legal stuff, but you can have too much of the legal stuff. I came to find out later on.
His defense was, I used the legal stuff that is provided me, and I put the same amount that I always do on my hands that I do before I come out to pitch. Now, on TV, you could literally see the sticky stuff on his hands.
And the umpire, gave him a little caress on the hand, as they like to do, as he comes into the game and said, ooh, that's too sticky, and didn't say, go wipe your hand off or anything like that.
Which has been offered to other guys.
Right, you're out of the game. And so there is the rub right there, right, in terms of having a protocol for what happens in this situation. And I don't think that there is one.
No, it kind of seems
how do I feel? I'm going to make it to the judgment call.
It's like a judgment call in way too many different ways.
Can we take the umpires out of that? I'm sorry, I'm not there to watch umpires.
I'm fine.
I'm just not.
I'm fine with him getting kicked out of the game. It's the 10-game suspension I have the problem.
You know how many? What happens if a guy gets taken off the roster for a PED?
What?
No roster spot can be filled the next day.
Okay.
How can that make any sense?
Right. There's no way you're going to tell me that somehow the sticky stuff is a more egregious violation than PEDs.
So, and by the Mets' reaction and the manager Carlos Mendoza's reaction, which he said, we need to stop doing this, and just so you could tell that he was annoyed at Diaz. So that tells me that Diaz has done this before and gotten away with it.
Bro, they've probably been warned.
Sometime you're going to get caught with that. He did. It cost the Mets big.
Right, because we already saw it yesterday where not having Diaz in the game against the Astros really cost them in the late innings because they didn't have a stellar reliever. Even with how bad he's been this year, he's still the best option they got.
So, I think that the MLB could come up with a protocol that says, first violation, here's my thought. First violation, he comes in, okay, go wipe your hands, okay, go out and pitch your inning. Okay, if you come off after that inning and they check you again, you got sticky stuff on your hands, throw him out of the game and suspend him for 10 games. I'm fine with that.
Yeah, exactly.
Because clearly he's doing that. Or let's say that he doesn't do that and he comes off the field and his hand is clean. He goes out a game 2 days later or 3 days later. The second offense, okay, then they can,
right. Yeah, I think that's how it'd have to be.
So let's just have a 1 strike, 2 strike, 3 strike, you're out kind of a thing.
Just make it make a little more sense than it does.
I think so too. Yeah. So. And I guess, I don't know, finally, I wanted to mention, I don't know if you read this series in The Athletic this week about missing bats.
What do you mean?
This was a 4-part series about how pitching has changed, and it goes back to sort of the Cleveland then Indians when they started junking some pitchers and bringing in guys that, threw the ball in a particular way, with certain spin rates, with certain velocities, and they changed their roster, and then the Rays they took up on this as well, and so that the kinds of pitchers these guys are going to get are representative of what today's pitching was heading into.
Interesting.
Yeah, it really was a very interesting 4-part series. The last segment was, and I recommend it highly, was velocity. Right? Could somebody throw 110 miles an hour or more? And from a physical standpoint, the answer is yes. For how long, obviously, we don't know, but it reminded me of our friend Mark Stevens' book, The Fireballer, because that was it. If a guy could come in and throw 110 miles an hour, as did Frank Ryder in the book, and have control. See, the thing about that guy in the book, like, he had pinpoint control, and he threw 110, and he could. So that's like a sick pitcher,
right? Exactly. And we haven't seen anybody that's ever even thrown 102 with pinpoint control.
Right, exactly. So, throwing 110 with control, and he eased it off. It was like 107 or
right.
108.
Eased it off.
So, but the idea that from the physical limitation standpoint,
that it's possible.
That it's possible, but the idea that you're going to have control there, like you said, I think is really doubtful. So worth reading that series, I think, if you want. And yeah, I think we're kind of getting to the point of the season where injuries are going to probably play the biggest role, I think, in whether a team is going to be able to sustain their lead or make a comeback.
I think you're just kind of hoping that you're not a team like the Phillies looking at your best two players on the IL right now.
Yeah, well, they still got a pretty big lead.